To say good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really happy to welcome Professor Enrique Chaux from the Universidad de los Andes. I don't speak Spanish, so sorry if I butchered that
That's
pronunciation.
perfect. Yep.
Um, Dr. Chaux is a preeminent researcher of youth development, and he has been working closely with the government in Colombia on educational and human development initiatives for decades. And today he's going to be presenting some of that work in summary, also from a policy perspective. This is a really, I think, special and I would say unique opportunity to learn from Dr. Chow. And for those of you who are not able to join us today for the talk, this will be this video and the talk will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you can tune in then. So just a little bit, maybe uh, a few sentences about the Global Possibility Network. We are based at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education and the GPN for short. What we do is we bring together people from around the world that are doing cutting edge work in the field of youth development. And our approach, possibility development, is features prominently in our work as also a consultancy and as a what we could call an action tank for research activity and consulting activity. So that's a little bit about the GPN, and you can look up our website at gpnnetwork.org. So, once more, I introduce now Professor Chow, our December GPN Speaker Series guest. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And thank you for organizing this and for being here. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with you what uh, what the reflections and what we have learned about our work um, trying to help the government promote social emotional development in our country. And if I was thinking recently that as a researcher, sometimes what you can do is just to have some suggestions at the end of the discussion section of your papers. And fortunately, there are many more opportunities, and we have had the privilege of working with governments who have listened to us and with whom we have worked um, closely, so they take seriously the work that we do as researchers. And that has given us an opportunity to learn about how to translate into real life, into a big scale, the work that we do and with what we learn about positive development, social emotional development. So I would like to start by asking you to imagine this situation. Um, Imagine that you're in a country with very high levels of violence, one of the highest in the world. And not only community violence and intra-family violence, domestic violence, but also in schools, very high levels of aggression, very high levels of bullying. And then that's Colombia. And then imagine that the Ministry of Education, there's a new Minister of Education who values research and evidence and also values peace and democratic education. And that's Cecilia Maria Vélez. She was the Minister of Education for 8 years in Colombia. Um, she was actually, surprisingly, she was one of the few ministers of education who knew about education. Before her, for several years, there were people, intelligent people and committed people, but who were not um, experts in education. Cecilia Maria Vélez was actually expert in education, and um, and she valued peace and democratic education and citizenship education. And she actually said, citizenship education and democratic education should have as much relevance in the educational system as mathematics or language. So it was a huge opportunity. And one day she called me and she said, I need help to promote these topics in our system and in our very decentralized system. Colombia, the Minister of Education has very little power about issues such as the curriculum. Usually, the curriculum is decided at the local level by schools themselves. The schools can decide, even public schools, private and public schools can decide. They have the autonomy to decide what they're going to teach and how they're going to teach it. So it was a very challenging situation, um, and and she needed help, and she said, "Well, let's think about ways in which this can be a big priority, and we can create a big movement in Colombia towards these topics. But we cannot decide on the curriculum from the ministry." Well, that was what the challenge for us 20 years ago. It was actually the year 2003. And we created a group. And I was the leader of that group, and a group of people from different universities, from different NGOs. There were also some teachers, some public and private school teachers, and we had to think about what to do to help the education system give priority to this. So we basically did two things. The first was the creation of national standards of citizenship competencies. By that time, there were national standards for mathematics and national standards for language. And those standards are more like guidelines, basically, because the schools do not need to follow them. I mean, there was no law at the time which say that the school need to follow those standards, but it was more like this is what the Ministry of Education expects that your students will learn. And and for mathematics, it was very clear in third grade what they were expecting the students to be able to do in third grade, fifth grade, seventh. So she asked us to do the same for citizenship competencies. So this was a great opportunity, and what we did is that we took everything we had from our work at the universities, from our work at NGOs, from what many schools were already doing at the time. Um, and we created some standards on competencies on three basic areas. One was peaceful relationships. There's a wonderful word in Spanish called convivencia, which is living together peacefully and with harmonious relationships. Democratic participation, being able to get involved in initiatives, in projects, in movements to promote changes in society, to promote human rights, to create a more equal society. And also, we dedicated a whole chapter on standards related to diversity, to issues of diversity, which was very, everything was actually very revolutionary in Colombia, was very new. And there were high expectations for that. And we tried to organize everything in four different types of competencies. One was more cognitive. And so, for example, critical thinking, the capacity to question things and question why things are the way they are and can they be different. Emotional ones, for example, anger regulation or empathy. More communicative, like active listening. And we created a new category called integrative competencies, which, for example, in conflict resolution, in order to manage peacefully some conflicts, you need to understand the perspective of others, to develop the capacity to take different perspectives. You need to develop the capacity to think about different alternatives, to think creatively, to promote different alternatives. You need to manage your emotions, and you need to listen to others, and all of those competencies should come together at a higher level. And that was conflict resolution. And we did that for third, fifth, seventh, ninth, and 11th grade. And at the same time, we developed a national test of citizenship competencies. So this was, a test that every school, every public and private school in Colombia had to take. And the test did not give um, specific results. So students will not know their own specific results, but the schools will know their aggregate scores. And those results were public. So, and there were no sanctions, for example, for schools with low grades. It was not punitive. It was more formative. It was to give information about how were the schools, how were the students. So the idea is that the ministry was saying, this is what I expect um, the students to be able to do, and we're going to test whether that is happening, and we were going to make that information public. um, but you can do it the way you prefer to do it. So the ministry was not saying how to promote those competencies, was just sending the message, this is important. Okay? So we did that very quickly. We created a national test in a very short time. Actually, it was like a couple of months that we created the test, with all the limitations of a paper and pencil test. We didn't have all the AI options that we have right now to analyze text or things like that. And there were many conferences, publications. It was a huge movement. Actually, the standards were there were 1 million copies of those standards, and they were all over the country. They were in national newspapers, in regional newspapers, all over, and it was huge. More than 1 million students took the test. And so what we started to find out after this, there was a lot of excitement, and we were very enthusiastic about what was happening. It was actually the biggest movement that we have had in recent history in Colombia related to these topics. But then some months later, we started asking in the schools what was happening, and what we started trying to see how much was this making changes in the way these topics were taught in the schools. And then we started seeing that most of the schools were not making any change. Some were doing the same practices, but with different names. And most of the schools were working on more on the traditional values education perspective, in which the schools decide, well, this month is going to be the month dedicated to honesty. And there were a, a lot of activities related to honesty. There were posters of honesty, and very traditional way of promoting this, like saying to the students, you should be honest. And what we know from research is that that doesn't work. That creates a narrative, a discourse, but doesn't give the skills necessary to confront real life situations. And in the worst for us, I mean, the most surprising activities that we found was that the schools were used to having like how do you say pageant, uh, um, in which girls, it was all the time only girls. Um, Usually, what they will do is they will there will be some girls who will represent honesty, some girls who will represent respect, and what we started seeing is that they changed that to the competencies in the standards. So there were some pageant awards in which there were some girls with Miss Empathy, or the most ironic for us was Miss Critical Thinking. So when we saw that, we say, well, there's a problem, and we need to understand what's happening, because that's not what we wanted. That's not the way to promote empathy. That's not the way to promote critical thinking. Um, so we started to understand that great part of the problem was that the whole thing was being promoted as a cascade, which is very frequent in public policies and in education. And there was a study conducted by a student of mine called Marcela Costa, in which she conducted an interview at the Ministry of Education with the person who was in charge of citizenship education at the Ministry of Education, Rosario Jaramillo. Maybe Mike knows Rosario, or people know her. And the interview was wonderful. And it was very clear how to promote these competencies, and how to create active learning strategies in the classrooms and dynamics in the classrooms to promote those strategies, those competencies. But then Marcela went to do the same interview at the regional level, at the state level. And the interview was okay. But then she went to a town near Bogota, a town called La Calera, near here. And the interview was terrible. And then she went to a school in La Calera to do the same interview. So those were 4 levels. And in the last, in the schools, um, the head of the school say, well, citizenship competencies, well, yeah, that sounds familiar. That's all he said. But then we realized that there was, I don't know if in English you use the expression of broken telephone line, the game of saying something to someone and then finding what goes on in the through the line. That's what we started seeing. And at the end, we realized that the standards fell for some schools, and for a lot of teachers, felt like imposed from above, from the ministry, and very top down. And the standards were saying what was expected, but not how. And then we realized that a big part of the problem is not giving strategies, not saying how this can be done. So so we started thinking about how to promote specific strategies about how to do it. And so in the next year, 2005, almost 20 years ago, we created a program, a and program based on evidence, research-based program, evidence-based program called Aulas en Paz, or Classrooms in Peace. What we did is that we went in to understand uh, the programs that were having the best evidence in the world at the time, and what could we learn from that, and we created a new program. And we did it at a small level. So we went from working with millions of students, helping the Ministry of Education have an impact on millions of students. We went from that to working in 3 schools. And in those 3 schools, we worked for 3 years in a row, trying to develop strategies, trying out the strategies, conducting evaluations, very much research-based development of the strategies. And we create a multi-component program with components for the students, components for the families, with home visits to the families of children who were having more problems, specifically more aggressive problems with aggression, and doing also extracurricular peer group strategies. And the program has continues working. Next year, we're going to celebrate 20 years of the program. The program is based on 8 social-emotional competencies. The national standards has many. We say, no, that maybe is too much. We should prioritize. So we prioritize 2 big topics, peer conflicts and bullying. And we prioritize 8 competencies: anger management, active listening, perspective taking, creative thinking to think about different alternatives to solve a conflict, and the disposition to think about the consequences of what I do, what can happen to me, what can happen to the relationships. And for bullying, we prioritize empathy, critical thinking, and assertiveness, the capacity to defend one's rights or the rights of others firmly, but without aggression. And these 8 competencies were coming from what we were finding in our own research and in research that we were reading around the world. And we knew that those who were having more problems managing their conflicts were having more problems managing their anger. They were not listening to others. They were not taking very much the perspective of others. They were not thinking about different alternatives, and they were not thinking about consequences. But those who were having better ways of managing their conflicts had developed more these competencies. And for bullying, we were very much inspired by the work of Cristina Salmivali and others who were saying the role of bystanders are crucial, and bystanders should be able to empathize with those who are suffering the aggressions, and should be critical of the dynamics of the group and say, well, why do I have to follow what the leader of the group is telling me to do if I don't agree with that? And should be able to have alternatives to stop assertively and collectively in groups those situations. So we developed many strategies to promote that. And we have almost 20 years, we have implemented the program in about 500 schools, mostly in Colombia, but also in Mexico and Chile. And Peru. Peru actually has a national curriculum. The national curriculum, social emotional development, is inspired by Aulas en Paz. So the program has grown a lot, and we evaluated several times. And after each evaluation, we do changes to the program. But we have had many challenges. One big challenge that is common to most programs in this area is fidelity. The program works really well when we find that it's implemented the way it is supposed to be, it was designed, or in a way that is similar to the pedagogical strategies of the program. So adaptations are fine as long as they maintain the same pedagogical pedagogical strategies. But sometimes some teachers are very used to traditional ways of teaching. So for example, we have seen in classes that where we have done observations, we have seen teachers who will get to the class and start reading the manual to the students. Instead of organizing the activities and doing a very active pedagogies, they start reading or copying in the blackboard the, the instructions of the activities. So that's a huge challenge for us. We very quickly realized that we need a lot of teacher training, and we realized that most teachers that work in the Colombian system right now did not learn anything about social emotional development, or about conflicts, or about bullying, or or about even classroom management. They learn very little in their schools of education. So we needed to compensate for that. And also we have seen huge challenges in sustainability of the program. And again, um, a new lesson for us is that maybe what we did was just top down. We developed it at our university, and we passed it through many rounds of evaluation. And when it was ready, we it to the rest of the country. Again, very much top-down approach. Here are the some of the references if you want to see evaluations. Um, and then in 2006, um, there was a big movement in Colombia around the issue of bullying. As in many other countries, there were cases of victims of bullying who decided to commit suicide, and there were very sad situations, and that created a big movement around the topic. And the media was very active, showing in making this highlighting what was happening in most of the schools. And at the same time, I conducted a study about bullying in Colombia, which found very high levels. So we were able to show that it was very prevalent. And we started analyzing variables that were associated with that, and with many conferences. And there was a big alliance between researchers like me, parent associations. There's a very well-organized parent association called Red Papás in Colombia. Uh, the government, who was still listening to us, and the media. And, and that created a big movement around this specific topic. And there were campaigns, and the private sector, especially foundations associated with big companies, decided to prioritize this. And I guess that time, from 2006 till now, uh, there has been a big change in attitudes towards bullying in the country. Um, in 2006, it was very common to hear people saying, well, that's a phenomenon that is imported from the UK or the USA. We see it in the movies, is up there, is in Hollywood, but it's not here. Doesn't happen here. Many principals will come to us and say, well, that doesn't happen in my school, or it's not as bad, or it makes you stronger, it builds up character, or aggression is not as bad, it's acceptable. And then with results from research, we started showing in the study that I did, was throughout the whole country. I found that no schools had zero bullying. There were no schools in the country with zero bullying, and that was the media took that and they started showing it. So principals who were saying there's no bullying in my school, then the research was saying, well, that's not true. There are no schools in Colombia with zero bullying, and we also show that most bullying situations occur um, without adults knowing about it. But their classmates or their friends, their peers know what's happening, but the adults don't. So I guess that, which was very common in 2006, right now is very rare. Right now is um, there is there is a huge amount of knowledge, and there is actually the agreement that is there's a high incidence that is it has many negative effects, and that is not acceptable. So that's in great part because of this alliance. But then um, these attitudes against bullying is not enough to stop bullying. And what we have seen in our studies is that traditional bullying, like physical bullying or like more verbal, direct bullying in the schools, in the classrooms, in the playgrounds, that has been decreasing constantly. But at the same time, cyberbullying has been increasing constantly. So there is a greater awareness, and right now there is more disposition to do something, but still the problem remains there, and the schools are still without strategies about how to manage. So what has happened since? In 2013, there was a new law for convivencia escolar, for peaceful relationships. And again, I was able to participate. I was able to go to Congress, and it was interesting because at the beginning they did not listen to what research were saying, but at the end they took into account some of our recommendations. And the Ministry of Education was the one that was in charge of developing the standards, the specific um, the specific guidelines about how to implement the law, and they ask us again. So again, there is that connection between the government and research, which was has been very useful, I would think. So what did the law say? Basically, that all schools need to have some committees that will be thinking specifically about what to do and how to manage issues of relationship and social emotional development. Um, and that, that's very easy for the schools to do. To say, okay, we have a committee, and one person from representative from the teachers, representative from the students, representative from parents, and the head of the school and the school psychologist. They all are part of this committee. So that's what was easier for the schools to implement was what they implemented the first, and the same at the level of municipalities and the same at the national level. But then schools, according to the law, need to have a program that promotes citizenship competencies. The law doesn't say how those programs should be implemented. The law only says that they should have a program. But that's very ambiguous. So they can say, yes, we have a program. Once in a year, we have the convivencia day, and that will be enough. Um, so that's I think that's an opportunity that was missed because many schools don't have enough about how to promote these competencies. We need the strategies throughout the curriculum from preschool to high school with different levels integrated differently with mathematics and with history or with sports or with arts. There is so much that should be done, and many schools have not done it, um, because the law was ambiguous, and the other part about the law is that all schools need to manage cases according to whether the cases are from situations one, two, or three. something I came up and I suggested that we should divide situations into three groups. And the three groups, I'm gonna uh, explain the three groups, were based on our research. One was conflicts, another one was bullying, and another one was what we call school violence. So for conflicts, we what we suggested that schools should have is to promote that the students themselves learn ways of managing their conflicts. So here we're talking about conflicts in which there are no great power differentiation. So conflicts, for example, between friends or between classmates, where sometimes there is aggression, sometimes there is no aggression, and if the conflict is managed well, then it could be beneficial for the relationship. And the students can learn to negotiate the conflicts themselves or can learn to be mediators, peer mediators of the conflicts between classmates or teachers themselves, especially for young children. Teachers themselves can learn ways of being mediators of the conflicts. Well, that is very different from situations of bullying, in which what we propose is that all students, all schools, private and public, should have a protocol. And the protocol should say how to manage situations in which there is a report of a possible situation of bullying. And the protocol should be based on restorative justice. That's something that we have been working on since then, and we're very much, I mean, our evidence shows that restorative justice is such a great way of managing the situations. It can prevent further situations of bullying at the same time of developing more empathy and learning to identify how what you do while you are participating in a bullying situation, or even while being a passive bystander, what you do can contribute to the situation, can contribute to someone being hurt about it, and what you can do to repair the damage that you could have contributed to. So, the law says that each school should have their own protocol. The law doesn't state the steps of the protocol. The school should decide on that. But the law says that they should um, be coherent and they should be applied consistently whenever there's a case of bullying. And for school violence, in which situations in which there might be some weapons, for example, where there can be some gangs involved, where there can be some criminal groups, and we have in our country we have many situations in which the some criminal groups around the schools enter the schools, and they can have, for example, they can sell illegal drugs inside the schools, and they can carry weapons for that. So that's very dangerous. And what we propose and what was decided and included in the laws was that the schools should not manage those cases by itself. It should be with the support of other institutions. For example, there's a branch of the police dedicated for children and adolescents. Together with that branch, they should manage those situations, or with social and health services, or with family support services, with other institutions. So for situations of type 1, the schools can respond immediately. Even the adult who's there looking at for example, a fight in a classroom or a fight in the playground, the adult can respond immediately without following any established protocol. For bullying situations in which the aggression is repeated, systematic, and there is a power differentiation, then there should be the protocol, but the school should manage it itself. But for instances of criminality, of violence, it should be coordinated with other institutions. So that's what the law proposed. What we have found is that the committees, most of the schools implemented those committees, and the municipalities and the national committees are working. Prevention programs, some had some programs isolated, but few were very structured, and almost no programs have been evaluated. Aulas in Paz is actually is probably the only program or one of the few programs in the country with a rigorous evaluation. Most have not been evaluated. The protocols have been difficult to implement, especially because there's a tradition of punitive justice. So if you only have a strategy in which students should understand how they what they did caused some damage, and then they do some actions to repair the damage, there are especially some parents who think that that's impunity, and and they say, well, the school doesn't do anything for real. So it's very difficult because those parents, actually parents of victims of bullying, they are waiting the schools to throw out the bullies. And they're not thinking that much about the possibility of a learning opportunity. So that has been a challenge. Although restorative justice is expanding, it's expanding slowly. And well, and we have a system of reports, and most cases are not reported actually. So there is a large underreport. Again, we had the question of why. I mean, why do uh, we do help design policies which are according to research, which are according to what we know should work, but they're not really implemented. So one of the questions, one of the answers is that there are not enough resources. For example, not enough resources for training and support of teachers in the schools, or for school psychologists who can help here. Um, uh, there's so much to do that some people think that it's not enough to do something. We need to do much more. Um, and this is interesting. The law, I think what the last article of the law says that schools that do not implement what the law is saying can be sanctioned, and they can, if it is a private school, they can even lose their license. And so I thought that after a while there would be um, a lot of legal processes against schools not complying with the law, but there has been almost none, very, very little of this. And 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 I guess what worries us the most is that, again, the law is saying you should be doing this, but it's not saying how it should be conducted. For example, creating a prevention program, there are not enough materials and strategies for the schools to understand how to work these topics. And again, it was it was designed at the national level, and it was sent as a top-down strategies. So what happens at the top-down? Everything that I have mentioned to you so far um, was designed actually from the universities, or from the Ministry of Education, or from the Congress. They're all located in Bogota. And I mean, the university where Aulas en Paz was located, my university is in Bogota. And and it was more like supposing that you have something great, and then you bring it to the regions, and then the regions will implement it the way it was supposed to be. So um, from Bogota to the other places. So the local actors in the top-down approach are supposed to learn, implement, and sustain. And we know that that's not how people get motivated to do things. And there we have found wonderful teachers, wonderful principals who understand this is great. This is what I have been waiting for. This is closer to the mission of our school than most of what we have been doing so far. And they grasp and they start doing great things. But the majority don't feel that way. So while everything that I have mentioned to you was happening, at the same time, at the local level, there has been many initiatives. At the classroom level, very creative and wonderful teachers who are not actually paying attention to the national policies, are not actually paying attention to what the Ministry of Education says. They're thinking about what they can do to improve the lives of the students. Sorry. So so they, based on their own ideas of about what is needed and on their own priorities, they have developed wonderful strategies. Some have been developed even by students or by teachers. And also at the level of the municipalities, especially at the big municipalities, there had there has been wonderful developments, especially in Bogota, Medellin, in Cali, but others too. And um, and at these municipality levels, there are many networks that have been created so that teachers or schools can share their initiatives so they can see what others are doing. And that's a huge movement that has been going on at the same time. And I would say that that's a movement from the bottom up, because that's a movement created by individual teachers or individual schools who say, well, I have some idea, I'm going to implement it. And then they start sharing it with others through the networks. And that has given a lot of recognition and a lot of support, but very limited feedback. So usually in a place like this, for example, some teachers will say, well, I'm going to tell you what I have done in my biology class, and shares with others a wonderful project about caring and biology. And then that person gets a lot of recognition, and they say, great, you're doing a great job, continue doing it. But I have been part of um, those cases, and what I see is that there is little actually, there is little feedback about it. Um, and and there is very limited research about it. So what I'm seeing is that this is uh, an opportunity that is wonderful. There's a lot of creativity around that, but with more feedback and more research, the results could be much better. So what I want to say is that if you compare the two approaches, there are benefits and limitations of each. So for example, the top-down is based on research, which we know that something that is based on evidence has the possibility of having a greater impact. They're usually well structured. The strategies that are based on research are well structured, but um, sometimes, and we have seen it in our work, it can be felt as it was an imposition. There is that idea that if you don't create it yourself, you don't really own it. You're not that motivated to do something that others did for you. So that's less sustainable. And there is the big problem of the cascade implementation. From the bottom up, there are great benefits, especially ownership and motivation, sustainability. If you develop something, you're going to continue working for that because you believe in that. That promotes democratic participation, that promotes diversity. Um, each person can do something that is more specific to their particular context, their particular culture. But then it also has some limitations. Um, Lack of rigorous research, very little rigorous research, which means that sometimes they don't know if it is beneficial or detrimental. Many times based on their own intuition and experience. And we have found that it's hard to question some cultural beliefs. For example, in specific contexts where homophobia is accepted, um, then to create a context which questions those discrimination attitudes that promote discrimination is harder. Um, so what what um what we have been moving towards is to try to avoid both extremes. And it's interesting because in Colombia we have had both at the same time, but with little communication between the two. And what we need to move forward to, and what we're already working on, is to try to do more of a synthesis of those. And that's how I would like to end the presentation, to actually create a real dialogue between local initiatives, policymakers, and researchers. And for example, to do cultural adaptations at the local level of what was designed at a national level, or to add value, to do adaptations and changes at the local level. And at the same time, to do more constructive feedback. We need to learn to give feedback that is constructive, that is not destructive, that identifies what is powerful and what is working well and what can be done better, but also to be able to say, well, maybe you can do this better if you try this, or can we imagine changing this so you can do this in a different way, to identify what could be better. And um, and where what I see in the networks of teachers that I have participated on is that many teachers are not used to offering or receiving um, much feedback from their peers. And sometimes they have done it, and they do it really well. And many teachers are great in that. But there are some who are used to only giving like a negative feedback or positive feedback, this saying this is great, or this is saying this is terrible, but not constructive feedback in which you identify what can be done better. And we need to promote that more. And at the same time, yeah, not just listening and praising, but actually giving feedback and having more platforms for sharing initiatives, but also with curators. And we have some wonderful platforms, but um, very little critical analysis of what what is happening. So it's like, I want to share this, and everyone says this is great, and they share it in different platforms, but then um, there's limited suggestions about what how can be done better. And I also think that there should be more research from to the initiatives that are there that are very creative, very interesting, but we don't really know if they're working or not. We don't really know if they're making the changes that they're supposed to be doing. So much more research for those uh, initiatives developed at the local level could be great. And also to have more pilots of the public policies. I'm seeing what I've seen in these 20 years that great policies which were designed um, in very short time and which were became a law without a pilot before, without trying out. Um, so so we actually, I think that we should be moving towards having policies that are constructed like a first draft, and then having some period where they can be tried out in a couple of states, and then if they work well, or a couple of municipalities, and then you can learn from that and say, okay, this is working, and you can improve this, or this is not working, we should redesign it, and then get to the national level after some periods of trying out and piloting and receiving much feedback. I think that should be great. And the other big point that we know that we should be doing much more is on working on pre-service teacher training. Future teachers should learn how to promote social emotional development among their students, and how to develop their own social emotional skills and competencies. Um, and right, the way that the schools of education are, very few are dedicating time to this, and this can be more important than almost anything that that they're learning for themselves and for their future students. To promote how to promote positive classroom climates, and how to use research and and do research about their initiatives. This is crucial. And also how to conduct mediations, because they will have to be conducting mediations in their everyday classrooms, and how to promote restorative justice processes. So that's what I wanted to say. Sorry that I took a little more than expected, but I guess we have some times for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enrique, Andrew, let me jump in because I can only stay
Yeah.
so long. I have another meeting. But Enrique, first of all, I see the connections to your thinking over many decades here. I know your early work, and I really see the continuity of it in the policy informing work you're doing now. So despite the challenges in all of this, it's really inspiring to see you and your group hanging in there with it, trying to have an impact on national policy around something so important as violence and violence prevention. I just want to share that we struggle with similar things in different areas. We have such a hard time implementing things at scale, going from a few people who are committed to larger groups, even at the school level, much less the national level. So I take away many lessons from this, and it would be helpful for us to be able to read about some of this work. We may need Spanish translators to do that, but I think there are lessons here for all kinds of school-based and community programming.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, we're in the process of writing about this, and we'll definitely write in English too. So we can share.
Good. And Andrew, I know that Kareem has a question in chat. Do we want to take that, or did you want to jump in first, Andrew, with comments?
No, I'd like to hand it over to Kareem, make sure that he has time for his question. Mike, are you going to take off?
I'm actually, I sent a message to my other group saying I'm going to stay a little longer in this meeting, start without me. So I'm going to
Cool.
hang in here
All
for a
right.
bit. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Over to you, Kareem.
Thank you, Mr. Babson. Thank you, Dr. Akla. And thank you for your very insightful presentation, Professor Cho. And I'm very like engaged in your idea that students should empower themselves to get the idea that bully is not acceptable, which is not um, from the view of top down. This the ideas and the things that they learned are originally not acquired by themselves, but from the perspective of a bottom up, they can initiate activities. They can form their leading for the form the leadership by themselves. I think that's a very helpful and insightful um, an insightful idea to promote the positive development of reducing bullying in schools. So my question is, how did you maintain the close relationships with the leading force or leaders of bottom-up groups to ensure that their activities and the relevant ideas by them are evidence-based and scientifically sound? Thank you.
Great. That's a great question because that's a big challenge. First I want to mention something that we have done in our Aulas en Paz program, which has been very useful, is to give roles of leadership to those who have been who have shown aggression in their relationships, but to give them leadership in initiatives against bullying.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting because the ones who could become the bullies of the classrooms if we don't do anything, then become leaders of campaigns against bullying. And we have done that for in fourth grade. And it's amazing to see that because they become very much engaged. And what we see is that many of them, what they really want is um, to have a role of leaders. And the role of leader that they're used to finding is leaders of in situations of bullying. But if we give them another option of being leaders in a more pro-social way, they find it cool and they like it and they engage in that. And that has been very useful. And the other thing is that, yeah, we need to be able to engage those who are leaders in their groups or in their schools or in their districts. And if they're already leaders, they want to do something and to um, give them help them develop strategies in which they could um, um, redirect their leadership towards something that is that could have a more impact. So a great way of doing that is with participatory research, in which they we help them identify the issues in which they want to create improvements, in which they want to do research about, and we help them with the support they need to do it more carefully and to really understand if they're reaching what they really want or not. And that has worked more in more qualitative research than in quantitative research. In quantitative research, it's harder to do. I mean, if we have randomized groups and some interventions, some controls, and that's harder to do from that bottom-up approach. But qualitative research works really well to do that, to help them develop their own capacities to do research.
Thank you for answering my questions. I think it's very good. It's a very interesting idea to select people with bullying history as a leader. And I'm wondering how did how did your group identify people with bullying history in schools and make sure after they take the leadership they won't do anything like
Yeah.
outside of the
Yeah, classroom in our lesson pass, the Classrooms in Peace program, we have extracurricular activities with small groups of only 6 children. And we identify them by surveys in which they have to do peer nominations of their classrooms and by asking the teachers. But something that is crucial for your question is that those small groups are organized so that 2 of the 6, for example, a group of 6, 2 will have problems of aggression and 4 will be very prosocial, the most prosocial children in the classroom, so that the prosocials are majority. Those who are more empathic and more assertive, they will be a majority. Whenever the groups are not organized that way, and we have seen situations in which some teachers, for example, change the organization and they say, no, we want to have 3 and 3 because we have to have more impact on more children who are being aggressive. And they have 3 aggressive and 3 prosocial. What we start seeing is that the aggressive become the leaders, but not only leaders in general, but leaders of aggression. And the prosocial start becoming more aggressive. So that can be very dangerous. So they need to be minority in a group where the prosocials are majority, so that what you're saying doesn't happen.
I see. Thank you for explaining that.
Enrique, it harkens back to some of Bob Selman's work in pair therapy.
Yeah.
Where you match an aggressive child with a pro-social child, so to speak.
Yeah.
Listen, I wanted to say thank you at this point, Enrique, and I know Jackie has a question, but I better get to my other group, which I'm supposed to be leading. But I want to thank you so much for this talk, and I'm sure a lot of our network will watch it. It's too bad we couldn't have more people here today, but it's a rich discussion nonetheless with Kareem and Jackie's questions. So thanks again, Enrique, and Andrew, thanks for organizing.
Thank you, Mike, for the
Hey, Mike.
invitation, and it was great seeing you again.
Take care.
Take care.
Jackie, you want to chime in?
Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry. I'm in the very loud space right now. If you can hear me.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah,
hear
we
me?
can hear you fine. We
Okay,
don't hear
cool.
the noise.
So as I was thinking about it, as you're working with younger students, then I was like, oh, maybe my question isn't as relevant, but I was just thinking in terms of the most recent bans in Australia surrounding use social media bans. I'm just curious, as your work has evolved, regardless of age level, how has technology and social media played a role in combating bullying, any social emotional initiatives? How has what opportunities and what challenges have emerged as technology has evolved?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't think I have the final answer, but I think there's something that every day we're thinking about that. In Colombia, there's a project for a law that is right now in the Congress to do almost the same as Australia did. So that's a big discussion right now here. Our approach in general has been that children need to learn how to manage technology and how to manage technology carefully. So instead of prohibiting the use of technology, I mean, we understand that it's important to prohibit for very young children, but especially in pre-adolescence and early adolescence, we are more inclined towards developing the capacities to understand the limits, to understand how if you do something that can hurt others, then that you can create a big damage, even if you don't do something when others are doing it, and to learn to empathize. Empathy is a big challenge in social media because you don't have the person right next to you when which is different in the classroom where you see the person crying, or in the media sometimes you don't even see the person, and you don't it's harder to think that the person is going to be hurt, and to understand that is crucial, and also to understand ways of reporting things, and especially on, again, not being a passive bystander. On if you're if your classmate, if your friend, if someone in the social networks is doing something that is hurtful, to learn to intervene, to send assertive messages, or to report something, uh, so that you can stop something from growing and from hurting others. That's a challenge, and I think it should be a topic of instruction in classrooms. And we have actually developed another program that I did not talk about called Cyber Heroes, which is an adaptation from a German program called Medienhelden, program developed in Berlin, that does exactly that. So,
Hmm.
so I think we need to move, um, instead of going into prohibition, I think we need to um, help them learn to use technology in constructive ways, to understand the risk, to understand the risk of addiction to technology, to understand how technology can lead to um, worse sleeping patterns, and that can affect your health. And parents can have a great role in that, but I think I believe more in our group is more inclined towards developing capacities instead of trying to prohibit something that is, or right now, very much integrated into the social lives of students.
Thank you.
I, I appreciate that question. My son is 13. He's in seventh grade.
Mm,
And then I have a
mm,
daughter who's 9. And they both love messing around on iPads or phones or what have you. My daughter likes to make little YouTube videos.
mm,
And, then I had to explain, we should put your account on private so that only your friends can come and watch the video, and that it's not out in public, for example. And it's just, playing around. It's innocent kid stuff, but kids have to learn these are public, and there's just an element of protection involved there. They won't know that. The adults have to say that. But even for my pretty savvy 13-year-old son who has a lot of things figured out, I have to kind of remind him that, hey, there are things out there that are just not appropriate for you. And it's kind of a long story. You're just gonna have to trust me on this. But then it opens up to a broader conversation. So, yeah, parents do certainly have a role. But it is interesting to think about how schools can incorporate some of that explicit and direct pedagogy. I think that's quite important. I wanted to, first of all, thank you again. I learned so much, and it was just such a vivid and helpful discussion of an issue that every government has to wrestle with, really, which is the creation and enactment of policy. And it's a perennial issue of a top-down, bottom-up. Kareem, I thought your question really helped us think in a focused way about, okay, well, how does that look? And for example, recruiting leaders of organizations and at least having some kind of interface or engagement there. So, just a couple things. First of all, I'm on my local school board, and so that is the smallest unit of government in the United States. We're at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, in terms of government, but we do serve a crucial role of mediation between the state policies mostly and federal policies, of course. In the United States, as you know, Dr. Chow, um, we have a pretty decentralized system too. And there's a lot that devolves down to the states, but there's even more that devolves down to the local level, right? And so the school board is actually pretty powerful in terms of how we make decisions about what the administration comes up with. So the administration does the work of how do we meet these standards and how do we implement this and set standards for teachers to then enact it in the classroom, right? But the school board, we're the interface between the state government and the schools, the district, right? So this question is super interesting for me. And this is also just in parallel with my work at GPN. So here's one question that I had, which is, or maybe an issue, which is that I like this word fidelity, and I was thinking of the word standardization, but there's a slight difference between standardization and fidelity. And there's a little bit of interplay there between those two concepts. I think that, the way I think of it is that you want you want a high degree of fidelity, but you also don't want too much uniformity or too much standardization, perhaps. You want there to be some thing. But so maybe I'll just leave it at that. But I have to say, thank you so much for that image of the pageant and the miscritical
Oh,
thinking. I mean, that's I love that. I mean, that's amazing. But at the same time, you want to be encouraging people to be creative, and I'm really glad that you
mhm.
brought up creativity. Seemed really
Yeah, I
important
guess,
and often missing.
yeah, I guess there's a difference between um, fidelity in terms of doing exactly what is designed in the materials versus fidelity in terms of being coherent with the pedagogical approach.
Hmm.
And
Right.
that's what we want.
Hmm.
We want, I mean, um, this social emotional development occurs in practice, occurs learning by doing. It's not theoretical. And
Hmm.
so if some teachers have a new and creative ways of creating those opportunities to practice and to learn by doing, that's great. But if they start doing something that is more theoretical and more traditional, then I'm worried because
Right.
then we're probably um, informing the students but not developing their competencies, and that's
Mm.
worrisome.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, I think that's a wrap. But again, such a pleasure to listen to you, to learn from you. It's a real honor for us to have you. And thank you very much. I just want to express our thanks. And for those of you watching on YouTube and seeing this, make sure to tune into other GPN Speaker Series events. Our normal schedule is the first Friday of every month at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and sometimes that does vary. So check out our website, gpnnetwork.org, for more, or go to the GSE, Penn GSE website, and which is, I believe, penngse.edu. Okay, thanks very much again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Professor Cho.